Well, Vince, I've got one thing to ask you at this point. Are you ready for rapid fire?
Let's go. Rapid fire.
Okay, so as promised, we've got some Joe Rudolph, Charles Jagusah, Al Washington comments that we're going to hear
All right.
now. We're going to start with Joe Rudolph, the offensive line coach.
Okay.
He discussed the reason for Charles Jagusah playing guard this spring. Want to hear it? Here it goes.
I think the same thing. I think you want to try to do your best to get the best five guys on the field. I think Charles has great flexibility with what he can do. So that's the biggest reason. I think like if you put the when he was in the game, in the Penn State game, and you watched him, you were like, oh, who's that dude? Yeah. You know what I mean? And I think like you don't do that a lot, you know, with the offensive line. There's a lot going on for a guy to stand out that way. So when you see someone maybe could be as good as anyone in the country or better, you kind of keep developing in that spot as well.
Get the best five guys on the field. They obviously liked what they saw from him in the Penn State game when he played guard. Vince, what do you think?
I think having him ready to go at either position is obviously the way to go in the spring. Hopefully things start to get a little bit more cemented once you get into the fall. But having him ready at both positions, because look, you can make an argument he's your best guard. You can make an argument he's your best tackle. And he's your best lineman. He's going to be on the field, obviously. But depending on how the other four shake down is going to depend on whether he's going to be a guard or a tackle. So I think the spring is a perfect opportunity for him to continue to rep at both.
I think so as well. And I think that the way it sounds, we're probably going to see Jagusah playing more guard this spring than anything else. And now Aamil Wagner, for the second practice in a row we've been out there, was not practicing. Last week he was in uniform, but again, it was shells and he wasn't really, but yeah. He's one of the guys who's on, pitch count because he played the most snaps of anybody on the team last year. But I don't know. It's interesting. We're going to hear some comments from Charles Jagusah here in just a minute, but to me, it does. It feels a lot like Joe Rudolph really likes Charles Jagusah at guard. I'm not sure how much Jagusah likes playing guard myself. I'm going to let you hear from Jagusah right now because he was asked today if playing guard this spring is an experiment.
You never know what's going to happen, so we'll see. But for right now, they just told me to try to focus on guard, figure out, see how you do, see how you progress, and then we'll reevaluate it later. So that's what I'm doing right now.
What do you think?
He didn't seem overly enthusiastic, but I don't know him. I don't know him as a person. I don't know if that's just how he sounds when he talks. Like everything is whatever, And
that's what I was kind of trying to, because there were some other questions, like I asked him, like, do you have a preference? And he basically said, I'm going to do what the team needs, and, gave the company line and that kind of stuff. But like the whole line of questioning about playing guard, he didn't necessarily seem that excited about it. But again, we haven't talked enough to Charles Jagusah to know if that's, kind of like his typical demeanor, or if it's, is it, does he just have sort of a matter of fact demeanor in general? Because, like the overall sentiment I was getting did not, make me say Charles Jagusah loves playing guard.
Right.
You know what I mean?
That's not what I got out of that. That I can tell you. I did not get that Charles Jagusah loves guard. And again, he's a team player. He's going to be okay with whatever they want him to do. Okay, cool. He didn't sound excited, but again, I don't know him that well, so I don't want to put words in his mouth.
Right.
He was dominant as a guard when he was in the game, so as long as he's dominant, I don't care.
That's exactly right. And I mean, obviously, like when you look at the body, like his body and how physically developed he is, especially when you compare them to some of these other guys, like he does feel like a natural fit. And there is obviously a need for a guard at this point.
Right.
And like if you had Billy Schrouth on one side and Charles Jagusah on the other, regardless of who it is, it's pretty pretty intimidating, physical
Right.
couple of guards that you've got.
And I don't agree with this. Like Michael says, because it's clear he should be playing tackle. I don't necessarily agree that it's clear that he should be playing tackle because you've got some pretty good tackles on the roster too. And when, again, you're trying to get the 5 best on the field, to me, if I'm making that decision right now, Charles Jagusah is starting at guard for me.
If you're trying to get the best 5 on the field.
I'm getting the best 5 on the field.
But I think that Gerby Lambert is probably one of your top 5. Is that right?
Also correct. Yes.
Even though we haven't necessarily seen Lambert that much.
Just from a physical standpoint, and he looked mentally lost last year. You know what I mean? When we were able to watch practice. And so I understand why he didn't play last year. I'm hoping a year makes a difference. But I think from a physical standpoint, he's long, he's athletic, he's strong. Like, he's one of my 5 best. You know what I mean? And again, I'm not making the decision. So
no, but I'll tell you what. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to play what Joe Rudolph said about Anthonie Knapp because that kind of leads us into
for sure
where he is a piece of this.
I'm curious what he said here. So
the question was, is Knapp a guard or a tackle?
Yeah, he was pretty unique. Like, I think coming in, I thought that maybe he would really factor in more in the internal positions, like center or guard, and then he just was so natural playing out there, and he's got really good length. It's sometimes the average tackle height's 6'5" in the NFL. It's not 6'8". You know what I mean? That's more of the abnormality. But he just really does some things that helped us and gave us some strength and power and consistency out there, and we thought he played really well. So we'll see. But he does have flexibility as well.
I think we all agree, like, if we're grading on the curve, he played really well because of the situation he was thrust into as a true freshman who was an early enrollee, and because Jagusah did get obviously injured in the first week and no one else really emerged as a real candidate just because of the bodies that they had. Like, so again, if I'm on the curve, you could say he played really well. But if you're grading him against, the 8 million other left tackles in college football, I have a hard time saying Knapp played really well consistently throughout last season. Don't you?
Completely agree with that. And I think that his natural position is inside, whether that's at guard or center. And I think you've got better options, barring health, of course. And that's why he played tackle, was because of a health situation. You've got better options at tackle. He would not be playing tackle for me. He would be my 6th man on the inside. That's where I would have Anthonie Knapp.
Yeah, and now we haven't, obviously Knapp is not even out there right now because of his own injuries. So we haven't seen him do anything. And even what we have seen, in terms of offensive line, it's just been some drill work and stuff like that. We've really just seen where they line up and, where they're lining up for their drills as opposed to even seeing a full 5-man unit out there. But, to kind of go back, to getting the best 5 guys on the field, I tend to agree that if Gerby Lambert, based on at least, reputation, body type, what we kind of know about him, even though we haven't really got to see it in action, I think we would all be much more comfortable if he is one of the top 5, and that includes him playing one of the tackle positions, then Anthonie Knapp, I've kind of not fully bought in to the narrative that, Joe Rudolph is going to do anything he can to keep Anthonie Knapp on the field. Yeah. But when you listen to that comment, it's almost hard to fight against that now at this point. When you listen to what Joe Rudolph just said.
Against the fact that he's trying to make sure he's on the field?
Yeah.
Yeah. He was very complimentary of him at tackle. And it was almost like he was shooting him an even bigger compliment, saying, well, when he came in, I thought he was going to be interior, but then he showed us he's pretty good out there, and he did some really good things for us out there, and blah, 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 talking about tackle. It's like, hey, man, cross-train him all you want. That's fine. But, I just don't think he's your best option at tackle. I just don't.
No. And, just from a physical development state, look at what it took Aamil Wagner to get to the point where like, just physically developed, to get himself on the field. It took him some time. And that's, again, like if I'm comparing Anthonie Knapp to Charles Jagusah, I mean, there's no comparison in terms of physical development. You could probably even say that, like to a guy like Lambert, who's the same age, but is more like, that's the biggest thing that Anthonie Knapp needs, is just like physically, from a strength standpoint, based on what we saw last year, he's got to get a lot stronger. He's got to get, thicker in the upper body. And so, like, to hear Joe Rudolph talk about how great he was basically at left tackle last year, I don't think we were watching the same guy.
Well, and look,
I'm not trying to rip Anthonie Knapp apart, because again, I fully appreciate what he did as a true freshman, the team needing him, and but it was kind of a default situation to a large extent that got him out there.
And he was able to pick up the offense, obviously, faster than Gerby Lambert was, and that's why he started over Gerby Lambert.
Exactly.
You can't tell me that Gerby Lambert doesn't have better physical tools than Anthonie Knapp. Like that. That's you're fighting a losing battle if that's the fight that you're going to pick, right? So, has the last year allowed Gerby Lambert to catch up from a mental standpoint, and surpass Anthonie Knapp? Like, has he figured out, and is at the same level as Anthonie Knapp from a mental standpoint, because he is above him at the physical standpoint, right? And so you need to be caught up in the other way, and then it's a no-brainer to me. And again,
and now
I'm not coaching.
The other aspect of this is, like, we get wrapped up in where these guys are right now. And again, like, if we've learned nothing from Joe Rudolph the first couple of years, is curveballs will be thrown once fall training camp starts. Like, we've got 2 training camps of Joe Rudolph under our belt. And when did in either case, did anything go chalk? Like from the time camp opened until like the 5 that ended up out there on the field when it was time to roll it out.
Nope. And
just ask Rocco Spindler, right?
Yeah, exactly. And some of that had to do with injury. And then the response to the injury was what was like, like I think prior to the injury last year to Charles Jagusah, I think it was like, oh yeah, I think things are probably the way they should be. You know what I mean? And then the injury happened, and it was like, we're just going to throw a bunch of dice in a cup and we're just going to shake them out and see what happens. Like,
but it seemed like at times.
It's like, dang, man, we're playing Yahtzee over here.
Yeah. So now the other consideration, or the other consideration, I guess, is there consideration being given to moving Aamil Wagner from right tackle to left tackle?
It's possible. Yeah, it's possible. There's no doubt. Right now, Gerby's been the one to move to get both sides of it.
Right.
I think, I don't know. It's a good question. So when we get Aamil back, it might be something we explore.
So it's a good question, but not really an answer. So it's not something that, again, it sounds like he's very limited if, like doing anything right now, because, they're again, because of, how much he played last year. But it doesn't really sound like that was an option prior to that question for Joe Rudolph.
I think it's an option hypothetically for him. But the way he's looking at it, I think right now is that Aamil Wagner's out, so it's not an option. I need a right tackle. Like, I think, you know what I mean? Like, I feel like that's where he's at, and he's very short-sighted on a lot of things. Wait, did I say that out loud?
Man, that was some heat there. You snuck that little change up in there at the end. Speaking of curveballs,
like, spring is the time to experiment. Throw some guys
and again,
out.
Like, I go back to Jagusah, and that's why I think that at the very least you're giving him looks there to see what you think while you're working these other guys, because they know at least a year ago they were really confident that Jagusah could play tackle. So I think that that's always a fallback. And the other name that he snuck in there was Gerby Lambert, where they are working him at both tackles.
Yeah.
So he is getting that work. And remember, Anthonie Knapp isn't out there right now. So these other guys are getting the looks at both tackle positions while Knapp is out.
And then we're going to
again, as we have seen, there's always that, there's kind of that old school thinking that you shouldn't lose your job to injury. But I think that the way things have gone on this offensive line, I don't think that you can count on that by any means.
Nope. No, I don't. And I also think that if he was completely healthy, he'd still should lose his job. But that, again, I'm saying those things based on potential and based on what I saw last year. I haven't seen anything this year. And that goes a long way. And to be honest with you, nobody's seen anything this year because all you've seen is a bunch of drill work. You know what I mean? Not you
Exactly.
specifically. You know what I mean.
No, I know exactly what you're saying. Yeah. That's all anyone has seen. So we've seen 8 periods of practice and 2 periods of stretching.
And based on Brian's account, he you saw some guys doing some double team work and you saw some guys on the sled. Like, it's all well and good, but you haven't seen anything. You know what I mean? And so there's so much more out there to be won and to be figured out. And as much as we all want there to be a set offensive line and a set quarterback and all of those things, we're going to be talking about this for the next 6 months.
Yes, absolutely. So other side of the ball, Jason Onye, defensive tackle. He's got some extra weight that he's added since he's been back with the team this spring. And Al Washington talked a little bit about the impact of that today.
It has, man, and it's good weight. I think he's north of 300 for, hell. I think it's the most he's ever weighed, but it's good weight. And I think it's helped him. I think he's stronger at the point of contact. I think it's almost like he's faster, to be honest with you. I credit Landau and Alexa Appleman. Like what they do, I think from a nutrition standpoint, is next level. And you see it like guys like Bryce. Bryce is starting to fill out. He's a pup. I think he came here, he's probably in like the 50s. Now he's damn near 70. And he still looks like you wouldn't pick it up. But like I think for Jason, going back to him, I think it's helped him. I think it's going to help him this season. And so I'm pleased with it.
He's about 20 pounds heavier. He was listed at 289 last year. He's up to 308 right now. And again, we're talking about defensive tackle. So
I always thought that Jason Onye looked like he was undersized to play defensive tackle.
Me too.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so him getting over 3 bills, I think, is pretty huge for him. And Al Washington is saying that he is not lost a step and he's actually faster. That's great news. Because he's a very athletic body that you can have on the inside who can make a lot of noise. So I like it. And
absolutely. And, I think that lack of the fact that he was south of 300 pounds definitely worked against him, regardless of how agile he might have been. I mean, to play inside, you need to be in that 300-pound range because, the guys that you're going against on the other side of the ball are all tend to start off at around 300 pounds, if not, in the 310 to 320 range. So, I think that it's going to do nothing but help him, especially if he has kept that step the way that Al Washington has talked about. We might actually, it feels like, maybe Jason Onye finally becomes an impact type guy that we've sort of been waiting on for the last few years.
He's got the body for it now, because that was always the issue for a lot of these guys on the D line. It was that they just weren't big enough. They just weren't big enough. If you're north of 300, you're big enough. So now you got to start making some plays.
Yep.
Excited to see what he brings to the table.
So Vince, we were just talking about the basketball transfer portal being open before the season is over with. And Scottie Pippen's son, Justin Pippin, is entering the transfer portal despite his school, Michigan, preparing to be in the Sweet 16 this weekend. What do you think of this development?
I hate it. I'm not going to blame the kid completely. It's partly him, but I'm not going to blame him completely because this is the system. And if you want the best landing spot, you got to get yourself in the portal and you got to put your name out there and all of those different things. Like, I get it. I hate that he has to make that decision. And it's fun. God, if I'm his dad, I'm counseling him. Like, dude, you've got finish what you started. Like, you're part of this team. Finish what you started. Then we'll worry about the transfer portal. Because if a team really wants you, they're going to find a spot for you. That would be my counsel.
His name is going to open doors anyway.
100%.
The fact that he's Scottie Pippen's son,
100%.
that is automatically going to at least let someone give you a look. And
And
again,
if there's a school that he's interested in and that might be interested in him, like, guess what, Scottie? You can pick up the phone, you can call him and talk to him and be like,
exactly.
look, he's going to enter the portal, but he's got some unfinished business with his team and he's going to finish it out. Because look, it's a little bit of a red flag if I'm a coach and I want to recruit you and you just quit on your team. Like,
I think so too. You're in the middle. You're one of 16 teams still playing that has a chance to win a national championship or at least go to the Final Four. And crazier things have happened. I mean, crazier things have happened at Michigan before when they've ended up in the Final Four. So like, I don't understand why you couldn't wait a couple of weeks and like
maybe even just a few days. Like,
just depending. Like, get through it with your team and then do it, because the portal is going to stay open for a while. But
yes, it's open for a month.
Yeah, exactly. And to the question, like we were talking about this earlier this week, why the NCAA decided that the portal needs to be open now is beyond me. Like,
agreed.
As soon as the national championship game is over, open up the portal. It just I don't understand why it needs to be open while the tournament is still going on. Makes no sense to me.
No, and because you're forcing these kids to make decisions that aren't good for their teams. And like I said, if I'm a coach looking to recruit somebody, I don't want a kid who's going to quit on their team. Now, I will.
No, and like, what if they end up being in the Final Four? Like, even if he's not playing that much, I think he's played in like 22 games or something like that. Even if he's not playing that much, like, wouldn't you want that experience to be on a team that went to the Final Four, even if you weren't playing that much?
100%. 100%. And I don't know if he stepped away from the team at this point. I would assume so. But if he has not stepped away from the team, like, that's a weird dynamic too. It's just there's so many issues with it and I realize there's only 16 teams out of over 300 that have this quandary that they're dealing with. I get that, but they shouldn't even have to deal with that quandary. Like, that shouldn't even be a thing. But if it was my kid, I'd still tell him, you need to finish with your team. Do not put your name in the portal.
I agree.
It's selfish.
I agree. Yep. Because again, you've got like 3 weeks after the season actually does end. You can still get in there. So Joe Buck, who was the voice of baseball on Fox TV for more than 2 decades, has only called one game since joining ESPN, one baseball game since joining ESPN 3 years ago. But he's going to call the season opener Thursday between the Yankees and the Milwaukee Brewers for ESPN as a special one-off. My question to you, Vince, scale of 1 to 10. How much have you missed Joe Buck calling baseball?
It is criminal that he's not calling baseball. So maybe that's something that he wanted in his contract with ESPN. I don't know, but he belongs behind the mic of a baseball game. That is where he shines. And the fact that he's only done one game in 3 years, I don't like it at all.
Yeah, it's 10 out of 10 to me because, like, in his absence, are like, on a national level, are there any real play-by-play announcers who like Joe Davis, the guy who took his place? Like, he's okay, but he's not Joe Buck. Like, to me, baseball has really missed him over the, because like Fox obviously gets the World Series and playoffs and all that kind of stuff. Like, I think that baseball has really missed Joe Buck. I know I have, as someone, who loves baseball and watching baseball, especially, when it comes to like playoff games, big games, and that kind of stuff. I think he's very sorely missed. But I think that, like the quote that I read from him in an interview that he did, he basically said, like, he misses those big moments, playoffs, World Series. But when you're doing baseball, it takes 162 games first before you get to those moments. And he's like my age, so he's been a while and he's done it for a long time. So like the grind of getting there just wasn't worth it for him anymore. And so that's kind of why he decided to step away from it.
So it's his decision. He needs to do some playoff games then. Something. I'm sorry.
Agree.
He's one of the better guys out there right now, and he needs to be doing games, period.
I think so as well. But ESPN won't be doing baseball after this season, so maybe he needs to get as many as he can this year, because who knows, when he'll work for a company that gives him the chance. TD4ND says Vin Scully was the best. Hard to argue. He was great. Chicago Cubs have a really good one in Pat Hughes doing radio, but I don't think there'll ever be another one. There won't be another one like Vin Scully again. The fact that he started doing it in the 1940s and did it for as long as he did. And then he did solo broadcasts that were simulcast on TV and radio. Like nobody else does that.
Nope.
Nobody. Harry Carey, a great one in his own right, Michael.
Apparently,
I agree.
Michael's really putting that.
He really likes Harry 3 times.
Driving it home, baby. Driving it home.
Christopher wants to know favorite announcer for any sport. His was Keith Jackson. Whoa, Nelly. Or Doctor. Do you have one?
Pat Hughes is one of my top ones.
Yeah.
Very much so. He's way up there for me. I hate to say it, but I've always been a Joe Buck fan. I have been, and he's so versatile. He's good at football. He's good at baseball. I don't associate him one over the other, but I think he's better at baseball. But those are probably my 2 top ones, to be perfectly honest with you.
I think so. Like, I miss Joe Buck, even though he's still doing Monday Night Football, obviously, I just miss him being with Fox.
Yes.
Because he did a greater variety of games every Sunday, whereas it's a fixed package when you're doing Monday Night Football. So when the Cowboys were good, and there were obviously a lot of 4:30 games that ended up on Fox, because, the NFC and all that kind of stuff. So they would do multiple Cowboys games a year. And I miss that.
Yep.
For sure. He might be he definitely is one of my all-time. I'm trying to think of anybody else that's really the older school. Brent Musburger was another one, but I don't know if I would put him, in that same echelon as a guy like Buck. It was just like the older school type guys. They were just a lot different, I guess, in the 70s and 80s.
Yeah.
Play-by-play guys. And people have said, like Brian is saying, Charlie Jones, a little bit different, but that was, again, like Dick Enberg was another good one.
Yeah.
But, again, I think Buck is probably better. Someone said John Madden, but obviously he's like the analyst role and not the play-by-play guy.
He's a color guy. Summerall and Madden was a good combination because Summerall knew how to corral John Madden, and they played off each other well and that kind of. So they were a good duo.
Summerall didn't want to talk all the time,
right?
And that opened the door for Madden to just be his kind of zany self, and do his thing with the telestrator and turkey legs and everything else. Yeah.
Mark, that's just mean.
Mark says, when college football news slows down, I should amuse myself by having a show giving Vince famous movie quotes and see how bad he is at it.
First of all, if they're famous movie quotes, I'd probably still do a pretty good job, even if I haven't seen the movie. I just want to say that. Like, I do feel like I could do a lot of those. But yeah, seeing movies. Yeah.
Brian, I don't know why I didn't think of Al Michaels, but that's another good one. I mean, especially in his prime, really good. I do feel like he is still good now, but that Thursday night booth just lacks so much sort of life and energy to me. I think it's definitely my least favorite of any of the number one booths on TV right now, that Thursday night booth. But like 10 years ago, I think when it was Michaels and Collinsworth still, I would have put that right up there with the best of them.
Yep, I agree completely with that. I know Collinsworth annoys a lot of people. He doesn't bother me at all.
No, he doesn't bother me.
I think he's actually pretty solid.
I mean, he's kind of funny because, Vince, this is just the greatest guy ever. Like everyone's the greatest guy.
Yeah,
but,
yeah.
But he's still pretty good for the most part. All right, so one more sort of announcer type question. Dan Lebitard said on his show that the role of the ESPN sports anchor is less relevant in today's media. My question is, what's your Sports Center / highlight show viewing like now compared to, say, 20 years ago? Are you kind of in on what Le Batard is saying? What do you think?
I don't think he went very far out on the limb with that particular comment because SportsCenter anchors were like freaking rock stars back in the day.
Mm-hmm.
They just were. And I can't even tell you the last time I watched a SportsCenter. I haven't. Like,
do you ever stay up and watch Scott Van Pelt and his
sometimes? Like, unfortunately, I'm usually doing a show, and so I don't get to see him do his thing. But I don't mind him. I don't mind him doing. I don't mind him at all. I think he does a good job, and he would probably be considered a SportsCenter anchor at this point, based on what he does after those games and stuff.
Right.
But I like watching SportsCenter in the morning was my religious go-to every single morning getting ready for school.
Mm-hmm.
And, and that whole deal, like that's what you did because you had no other way of knowing what the heck happened, across the country in all of the sports. And so, watching Dan Patrick and watching all those, like they were like Chris Berman and they were freaking rock stars back then. And that was must-see TV. And it didn't matter when you started watching it. If you had an hour, you got to see everything because it was back to back to back to back.
Yeah.
And that's what I did every single morning. Every morning. Now I don't watch it at all. So it went from like must-see TV to I don't give a crap.
And, honestly, like especially probably starting after Stuart Scott passed away, like the people sitting in those chairs have just become more like one is much more like the next. There's not a whole lot of difference between any of them. And there's definitely, you have nowhere near the personalities like when you had Dan Patrick and Olbermann and Charlie Steiner and, like not Van Pelt, but I'm trying to think back. Why am I blanking on his name? Like what's it? The guy that was in Old School. You know who I'm talking about? He made a cameo at the kid's birthday party in Old School.
Oh,
Craig Kilborn. Thank you, DK. Craig Kilborn.
Yes.
Yeah. Like those were different personalities, and that was obviously the 90s. So it was even more than like 10 years ago. Personally, I think like the Scott Van Pelt Sports Center, like that is the best version of anything, in that little niche that ESPN has right now, because everything else, as we've kind of talked about before, is debate show. But what sets the Scott Van Pelt Sports Center apart is it's late night, so it's after the games. Now, I don't stay up and watch it either, because it is so late. Personally, like he's getting interviews after the games, after the game's in, he's getting these interviews. So he's actually having the people who had the big moments, on his show afterwards. Like if I was ESPN, that thing is running at like, what is it, like 12 to 1 or, like midnight to 1 or whatever it is. Like it's late. Like I would be putting it on the next morning and, like just replaying it the next morning because it's better than the other sports centers that they're putting on, in the morning right now. Because I don't watch them either. Yeah.
But wasn't it must-see TV back in the day? Like,
oh, absolutely.
I mean,
like when I was in college and, like, and then, out of college and, working in sport, but like, it's obviously different now too, because of the proliferation of social media and the fact that you can, for the most part, just pick up Twitter or whatever other, Instagram, and
you can find highlights instantly. And that wasn't always the case.
Exactly.
Or it wasn't the case at all. If you wanted to see highlights of a team that you couldn't watch on TV, you had to watch SportsCenter, period.
Yep.
Like you didn't have a choice.
Right.
That was the only place to go besides like your local news. And that was mostly garbage unless it was like high school stuff. You know what I mean? So yeah, SportsCenter was where it was at, man. And then they had the SportsCenter ads and the commercials and stuff. And like,
it was this is SportsCenter. Yeah.
Yeah, man. Those were fantastic. So it's a shame that like my kids have no clue what I would be talking about if I brought up SportsCenter. None.
Salty asking about the first years of Mike and Mike in the morning. He said they were worth being later to work.
I used to listen to them all the time, every single morning on my drive into work. Every single morning, that was quality radio.
Yeah, and really, again, like if you want to talk about watered down products like ESPN Radio, I don't even know what they've got on now. Like it's the morning show. They still televise whatever their morning show is, and I think I've tried to watch it for maybe 10 seconds once. It's just it's nothing like Mike and Mike. Not even close.
Once Mike and Mike left, they have tried so hard to fill that time slot with anything, and nothing has.
Like Golic and Wingo wasn't bad, but Mike and Mike was still better. But
Way
I mean,
better.
it's basically Greenberg decided he wanted to do something new and go be on TV instead of doing a radio show in the morning. See, DK is actually the smart one. He gets his news from IB Nation.
Smart man.
All right, well, that's going to do it for today. Appreciate you being here. Again, no evening show tomorrow because I'll be traveling and the other guys have some conflicts. We will be back Friday, though. I'll be coming to you from my hotel room in Birmingham. I think we're going to have a 3-man acoustical jam on Friday for the
Stereo,
Rapid Fire
baby.
Show. Yep. But look tomorrow for the interview with Sonia Citron. We will have that on our on all of our platforms, whether it be YouTube or whatever audio podcast platform that you happen to listen to. We'll have the Sonia Citron interview coming up tomorrow. So Vince, I will talk to you later. Everybody else,
Yes, sir.
talk to you later. Appreciate you as always. Good questions in the mailbag today, and we'll talk to you later on IB Nation Sports Talk.